Well, welcome into this series about friendship. We've been talking about it just briefly, but you and I, we value friendships. I think you do. I think you know that at least in some part of your life, you can think about a friend, maybe it's now or in the past, of a great friend that you had. And the Bible talks about from beginning to end the power of friendship. Here's what we've landed on. Friendship is powerful. I think you believe that already. Just something simple, but something profound. I think you and I all have locked on that there are people in our lives that have impacted our lives, maybe in low moments or even when you celebrate the great things. Friendship is powerful, something that most of us can't argue with, and the Bible's clear about that you and I not only need to have friends, but we've got to figure out how to be one that is healthy. So if you missed the first week, go catch up and lean into that. And we talked about the different friendships we should have. But let's take this further. Let's go deeper. My son, my oldest son, Hayden, has been learning about friendship in a powerful way. In fact, there's a part of his life I want to share with you, but you need to know something. I've asked his permission for this because it's kind of personal for him. See, Hayden is going into the 8th grade, his final year of middle school, which is weird for me to even say out loud. But he's going to be an 8th grader, and he's excited about school. He's excited. Now, for us, that's a big deal because he's not always been excited about school. Like just a couple years ago now, I remember going into 5th and 6th grade with him, and he was dreading it. In fact, conversation after conversation, going into school, after school, throughout school, he wanted to be out of school, be done with it, asking if he could do just anything else other than go to school. He hated it. And the reason is he wasn't doing well socially in school. He just didn't have the friendships that he wished that he had, and it was hurting him. I got to tell you, as a family, that was a part of many of our conversations during that season, our conversations with God and with each other, trying to help Hayden establish great friendships and even greater than that, a good self-esteem. And so fast forward, he switched schools, and as he was going into his 7th grade year, he started off school, and now he's not really been into sports, and so he hadn't gotten into the sports and teams and all that. He loves music, loves to play music, but as he started 7th grade, he's gotten to meet all these new friends and buddies and all that. Quickly, I guess they asked him if he would play football. Football season was already in motion, but asked him if he played football. He had never played football. We tried different sports. He wasn't into it. Well, one day he comes home from school, and he's like, hey, Mom and Dad, can I play football? I mean, this was like are you serious? Like at like recess, are you asking? No, he wanted to play football for the school. So we're like, yeah, you can play football for the school. That sounds awesome. And so we even went into hey, let's talk about what football, the rules and all that. We went and got into that. And I got to tell you, it's not the actual sport, but what happened to my son is profound, and he would attest to it. The dynamics of going to school changed. The conversations before and after school were no longer, do I have to go? Do I have to go? I don't want to go. They had become how excited he was and the friendships he was making. He discovered what you often find in sports is what we call the brotherhood. The crew where you actually get to know each other so well that you're like brothers. And my son, I don't think, is super intent on the wins and losses and all that. But the brothers he's established have become profound. And I would tell you, they have impacted his academics, his heart, his self-esteem, his joy. They've affected everything in his life. Now, here's what I'll tell you. Some of Hayden's friendship issues beforehand were not all the other people. In fact, we've got a statement in our family. Let me pass it on. This might help you. To have good friends, be a good friend. Now, I know some of you've heard that, you've read that. I don't even know where it comes from, but it's been a mantra a bit in our home that you do not just like demand other people to be like the best friends ever, everyone to treat you the way that you deserve and to respond to you. No. To have good friends, be a good friend. And my son was learning in a team dynamic the power of friendship and the power of being a good teammate, a good friend. And I think you and I can learn something very, very profound in this, is are we actually being the friend that we wish we had? Are we being, we've talked about the friends we need, and are we going to talk about the toxic nastiness in friendships and relationships? But I want you thinking distinctly about the kind of friend you're being. You see, there's a study, I watched it on a TED Talk. This guy was talking, and I love TED Talks, and so he's unfolding this research that was done called the Lockhart Principle. If you're unfamiliar with this, here the Lockhart Principle basically is summed up this way. Every contact leaves a trace. It was referring to this discovery, or at least being locked in from the English version of the best cop ever, Sherlock Holmes. So this is in relation to crimes. You know this, you've seen enough shows, come on, that every time a person committing a crime is committing a crime, there's traces left. And nowadays, you can track that pretty extensively from fibers and blood and all that when that person goes into that space, they're leaving a trace. They're leaving some sort of clue about themselves. Well, the guy doing the TED Talk brought this up, and I thought this was fascinating. Is he said that relationships do the same thing, and I would agree. We do the same thing. If you take the idea of the Lockhart Principle of we all leave a trace, every contact leaves a trace, I would say this, that when you have contact with a person, conversation, it's called conversation. When you have a conversation with a person, when you have interaction with a person, you leave a trace. You leave a mark, signifying who you are, what you've been, what you're like. And what if we took that and made that personal? What if you and I are not just doing church this week? What if you and I said, okay, I want to be the best friend possible, not demanding everyone else be the best, but I want to be the best friend I could ever be. Then let me ask you a question. What trace have you been leaving as a friend? When you leave the conversation, when you stop the text, when you leave in the party or whatever, when you leave work, what trace did you leave of yourself? What impact did you leave? Because if you are willing to ask such questions, if you're willing to say, no, I'm just not going to talk about everybody else, I'm going to talk about myself. If you're willing to actually investigate what impact you're having on other people, you will become a better friend. I can guarantee you that. I guarantee you the fact that if you actually pay attention to how you treat other people, better friendships just happen. So here's what I want to do. Here's what I want to do with our time. There is an incredible story that I want to share with you. It really happened. It's documented both in the Bible and out of the Bible. It's a story, if we zoom in, we're going to learn about some people that you and I need to learn about. But here's why I want to zoom into this particular story, is it's about friendship. It's about a good, healthy friendship. And I know some of us have examples of really good, healthy friendships. You might have one of your own, but I want to make sure that we're clear on what it looks like to be a good friend. And we can do so by zooming into the story. Now, as we get in the story, I want you to know all the characters involved in the story. There's three main ones. A guy named David, a guy named Jonathan, a guy named Saul. Let me explain. Saul being the king at the time. He's in charge of the whole deal. But then you got David and Jonathan. This is the two people that we will dwell on. This is the friendship between David and Jonathan. Now, here's the dynamic. David, when he was young, was anointed as the next king. Currently, Saul is, but David would be the next one. Now, here's the interesting piece to this. Jonathan is Saul's son. So in theory, if you've ever watched a good movie or know anything about your history, in theory, Jonathan would become the next king. Now, when Jonathan finds out about David, learns that he's been anointed as the next king, many of us would think, oh, that's where the conflict occurs in this story. Actually, no. The conflict is between Saul and David. Saul becomes very jealous of the next king. And David and Jonathan become best friends. And it's inside this story of best friends that we learn how to be an incredible friend. But you can't miss the context to all of this. You've got David and Jonathan just meeting, having a bond between the two of them, creating a friendship that would be challenged like most of our friendships are never challenged. So to start off, if you're a note taker, if you like, all right, I want to get this, what does it take to be a friend? The first one is this: be selfless. Now, you knew I was going to say this. I know that. Now, this is probably the typical talk of every talk about how to be a friend, how to be even a spouse, how to be a good coworker, whatever. Be selfless. I know, David, be selfless. But let's get into this just briefly. Be selfless in this context as friendship. Just think refrigerator rights. Just think a little bit about refrigerator rights. If you don't know what refrigerator rights are, here's the deal. It's when someone comes to your house and you're like, hey, you want something to drink? There's the refrigerator. Get whatever you want. Some of you have like the open door policy where you've got friends, neighbors who don't knock on the door, ring the doorbell. They just come on in. Mi casa es su casa kind of thing. Our house is your house. Our stuff, your stuff. There are no boundaries. You are just offering everything to them. If they ever need to borrow it, yes. The answer is predetermined, yes. That's what be selfless in a friendship looks like. It's like what I've got, I'm going to give to you whenever you need it. Do not worry about it. No paybacks. Just, there you go. Be selfless. In the story of David and Jonathan, we see evidence of this at the very beginning of their relationship, and I think it's pretty profound. Let me show it to you. In 1 Samuel, and Jonathan made a solemn pact with David. If you got in the weeds of this, they make a covenant. And Jonathan made a solemn pact with David because he loved him as he loved himself. Jonathan sealed the pact by taking off his robe and giving it to David. Now, I will explain this. So for those of you like, I do not understand that. Was he cold? No, just giving it to David together with his tunic, sword, bow, and belt. So here's what's going on. This is incredible, because it gives you and I a glimpse on how to be a friend. He's being incredibly selfless, but let me explain how selfless he is being. That verse, that part of the story tells us that Jonathan gives him his robe and his weapons, his armor. There is great semblance to it. That's why it was done. It was not because David didn't have a sword and didn't have a jacket. You see, in that tradition, on your robe, you would have had tassels lining the whole entire thing. Most specifically on the back of your robe. On the bottom there were tassels. These tassels were not just for decoration. They explained to everybody who you were. If you saw someone's tassels that were royalty, you knew that they were royal tassels. If you fast forward to a story about Jesus, there's a woman who's sick, who needs to be healed. She reaches out and touches Jesus's tassels, because the tassels would have symbolized who Jesus was. So Jonathan has one of those robes with tassels on him that say he is indeed the son of the king, the prince. If you saw his tassels, you'd be like, that guy's royalty. That guy's big time. Jonathan takes that off and gives it to David, saying, my authority, my privileges in life, my plenty, my provision, it's now yours, David. And most of that never happens with royalty. And not only does he give him the privileges of royalty, he says, take my armor. In other words, we will never battle each other. The armor of a prince would have definitely been significant. You would have been able to tell that he was royalty. So that's why if you get into the weeds of this stuff and you see Jonathan and David starting off their relationship saying who we are according to society and culture is no longer important. What you have is mine, what I have is yours. Is that what your friendships look like? And let me help you really get honest about this. Are your friendships more about what your friends offer you? Oftentimes, that's how it is. Now, you would be like, no, David, I would never say that. I know, but it's how we often believe, that your conversations with your friends, are they always about you? Are they always about what you need? Is your conflict always about how they didn't treat you the way you should have been treated? Is it constantly focused on you? Do you lend things to your friends when you should just give them? Do you support your friends in selfless ways, giving up your time, your talent, and your treasure? These are questions that lean into your life. I get it. And they help you determine, are you selfless? It's tough, but necessary, isn't it? Now, let me show you the next one. If you're going to be a good friend, not only are you selfless, but you must be faithful. Be faithful. Let's get into this. I'll just show you the verse, and then we'll get to it because you'll see what they're crying out for. Then David took an oath before Jonathan and said, your father knows perfectly well about our friendship. Now let me cue you in on some history here. See, by this moment in their friendship, Saul, the king, wants to kill David. He wants to take David out. He's jealous. He cannot understand why everyone loves David and does not love him. He's just so frustrated. It's such a bad time. We're Saul like, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to try to kill you over and over and over, trying to kill him. So David now fears for his life, which creates some, let's call it drama in the midst of all of these relationships. So David goes to the son of the king who wants to kill him. Says, your father knows perfectly well about our friendship. So he has said to himself, I won't tell Jonathan. Why should I hurt him? But I swear to you that I am only a step away from death. That's how extreme it was. I swear it by the Lord and by your own soul. So watch this. Look what Jonathan says. Tell me what I can do to help you. Tell me what I can do to help you. Now, some might say, well, wait a minute. That sounds more selfless. No, actually, it's faithfulness. Because it's faithfulness in the context of Jonathan. Jonathan, who he's got a dad, and he's got a friend. And now he knows his dad is being irrational. I mean, trying to kill his friend. That's just all messed up and all broken down and all just junky. But do you see the quandary that Jonathan is in that you and I often find ourselves in? Being faithful to our friends. When was the last time you asked your friend, what can I do to help you? That's a faithful act. That's saying, hey, I'm in this. And no matter how this situation plays out, no matter how life goes, no matter what's unfolding, I'm with you. Now, just so you know how much of a need this was, not only is Jonathan saying, what can I do to help you? David then responds with, here's what I need from you. And that's what we need to spend some time on. Show me this loyalty. Don't forget that word. I'm going to harp on it here in a minute. Show me this loyalty as my sworn friend, for we made a solemn pact before the Lord. Or kill me yourself if I have sinned against your father. But please don't betray me to him. David flat out asks very specifically, I want your loyalty. I need your loyalty. I crave your loyalty. And Jonathan responds with a powerful, powerful faithfulness. Never. Jonathan exclaimed, you know that if I had the slightest notion my father was planning to kill you, I would tell you at once. Faithfulness. But I'm not sure we all understand faithfulness. I mean, in a society now that we abandon a lot of stuff, we got to stay here. And I know the first week I mentioned loyalty, but now we're going to pick it apart. We've got to talk about the power of loyalty and faithfulness inside of a friendship. Let's give some definition into this. Loyalty is faithfulness to a commitment, okay? So let's just land on the basic definition. Find it in a dictionary. This is what they'll tell you. Loyalty is faithfulness to a commitment. Whatever commitment you've made to a person, it's faithfulness to that. The opposite would be betraying someone, okay? Or lying in some way. Or just severing it and it's just over. That's not loyalty. Now, what we've got to make sure is that we understand that loyalty is not feeding the addict what they're addicted to. Loyalty is not helping someone continue to achieve unhealthy, bad, destructive behavior. In fact, we're going to get to the toxic relationships. But you need to understand loyalty is not supporting bad and evil and destruction, but loyalty is faithfulness to a commitment. Loyalty is saying, hey, you may not make the best choice every time, but I'm going to offer myself to you. I'm going to be faithful to you. So let's word this maybe more in our everyday terminology. Let's understand loyalty. Loyalty makes your preferences take a back seat. Now, why do I bring up this? Because we talk as a church about preferences and convictions in church. But let's talk about it in friendship, that comes up, preferences and convictions, because here's what I know about every relationship. Someone does something they shouldn't do, whether it's a tone, something they said, something they didn't show up to. There's a breakdown. Someone does something they shouldn't have. And that's when preferences and convictions walk up on the table and say, which one are you going to choose? Are you going to go with what you prefer, and it's only bit what you prefer, or are you convicted about faithfulness, loyalty to this friendship? This is a big deal if you want good friends. And I'm really trying to get into your business on this, okay? Because some of you are like, no one's ever loyal. No one's ever that does this for me. Let me just get into this. If you've ever been wronged, I think all of us have, really. If you've ever been wronged, then you have in front of you the moment of loyalty. I'll say it this way. If you can't say sorry, you're not loyal. Do you remember where we started? To be a good friend, you must be faithful. And everyone's like, yeah. Now, we're at the root of faithfulness. What I have found is loyalty is typically tipped over based on, can someone apologize, or do they see no fault in themselves? And I think in my observations, according to what I've seen even in Scripture, if you can't say sorry, you're not loyal. And this will mess with many of us as we walk through our friendships, because this means that some of us have had relationships break apart because we thought it was all the fault of the other person when it was us that wasn't loyal to the relationship. Sometimes it's saying, I'm sorry. Sometimes it's saying, I forgive you. See, that is the battle zone of loyalty. That is the key that unlocks loyalty, is the ability and willingness to be so faithful that you admit when you were wrong. And I have found across our society that we struggle with admitting that we're wrong. We just don't like to do it. We have leaders in place that don't admit they're wrong. We have people in our lives who just say, I never admit I was wrong. Some people say, I don't have any regrets. If someone ever says they don't have any regrets, it means they've never been sorry, which is a problem. You and I have got to be good friends. I think we can admit that and land on that. And to be a good friend, you must be selfless and faithful. Now, we're only so far into this, though. Because what I would tell you is like, okay, so friendship is basically saying, hey, I'm selfless, and you can have, whatever you want in the fridge, and I'll hang out with you. No. It's got to go further. And the last one, here it is, be attentive. If you want to be a really good friend, good one, if you don't want to just demand from other people, take from other people, be selfless, be faithful, but be attentive. Be so attentive to what's occurring in that person's life. Be aware of what's going on in that person's life. And many of us are not. If you've ever had a friend who maybe their marriage fell apart and you're like, I had no idea they were even struggling. There's the attentiveness. If you ever had a friend make a horrible choice that they never should have made and you're completely blindsided, perhaps that person didn't have the friends in their life that were attentive or aware. I can show you this in the story of David and Jonathan. Let me show it to you. One day near Horesh, David received the news that Saul was on the way to Ziph to search for him and kill him. We've talked about this. Saul's got some major issues. Jonathan went to find David. Now, if you can put yourself in the moment here, Jonathan, perhaps in the palace, learns that his father is trying to kill his best friend. Jonathan could have said, oh, no, I sure hope David figures this out somehow. Or, oh, I hope David's not too discouraged. I'm hoping, no, he he leaves the palace. Did you catch that? Jonathan went. He went to find David and encouraged him to stay strong in his faith in God. Don't be afraid, Jonathan reassured him. My father will never find you. You are going to be the king of Israel, and I will be next to you, as my father Saul is well aware. That's attentiveness. That's not just saying, I sure hope that person does well. It's getting involved in their lives, going, I know what you're going through, and I want you to know that you can overcome this. One of the most brilliant people when it comes to being attentive in this is actually my wife. Now, yes, I'm biased. But what I have learned from my wife has helped me so much. See, my wife is good at being attentive of what's going on in the lives of her friends. She's aware of it. And she does things about that. In fact, I'll tell a story, a bad story on me. So I'm sitting there telling her a story about one of my friends and what they're wrestling through and a good choice that I felt like they made. I was like, wow, he did this. I'm just so proud of him. And she tells me, did you tell him that you were proud of him? And I'm going, no, why? What? Does he need that? And she's like, yes. He needs to know that you know. And okay, so I texted my buddy. Hey, I just want you to know I'm so proud that blah, 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 blah. And my buddy responded going, wow, thank you. I needed to hear that. And I've learned that my wife has taught me this over and over. She'll send cards to people when she's aware of what's going on in their lives. She actually will just get involved in their lives and say, I'm aware of what's going on. And just so we're clear on this, my wife has things to do. Okay, my wife is married to an incredible person, but that's a whole other enough. She's married, we got that, has 3 children, ranging from 4 to soon to be 14. So there's a mix going on in our home that has its own adventure. She has a full-time job. She is also a pastor's wife that has a whole other thing to it. She has the same amount of time as you have. Oftentimes, when it comes to being attentive and aware of our friends, actually knowing what's going on in their lives, many of us say, I don't have the time. Oh, I wish I had. No, we think we don't have the time and can, okay, let's just nail it where it is. Time is not the excuse. Time is not the excuse of not being attentive to our friends. If you want to be a good friend, we're not talking about your friends as in what they've been doing. We're talking about you. If you want to be the best friend that any friend could ever be, you are selfless, you are faithful, and you are attentive. You are aware of what's going on in their lives. Now, I've talked to you a lot about how incredible of a friend Jonathan has been. Perhaps you've even seen the one-sidedness of the story so far, where you're like, well, Jonathan seems pretty amazing to David. What's David been doing? Well, what's cool is David remained attentive to Jonathan even through Jonathan's death. See, Jonathan was killed during battle. But as time progressed, David continued to remain attentive to Jonathan. I'll show it to you. This is in 2 Samuel. One day David asked, is anyone in Saul's family still alive? Watch this. Anyone to whom I can show kindness for Jonathan's sake? David, even after the death of his very best friend, is still paying attention to his very best friend. That's called powerful attentiveness. So yes, is anybody out there? And he's given a response. Don't be afraid, David said. This is what David said to his friend, or to the guy. Don't be afraid, David said. I intend to show kindness to you because of my promise to your father, Jonathan. Now here's what's going on. He asks, hey, is anyone out there that is related to somehow my best friend? Because history tells us that all of the family would have been killed so that no one could uprise and hurt the next king. And what we find out is that he finds a guy. He finds a guy who's related to Jonathan, happens to be one of his sons, still alive, way off, kind of hiding. And David brings him in and engages him. Can you imagine how terrified he would be? Coming into the king's room and going, I might die right now. And he says to him, I will give you all the property that once belonged to your grandfather Saul, and you will eat here with me at the king's table. To be at the king's table was perhaps the greatest privilege that could be offered to anyone. If you were not the king yourself, to be invited to the table was the most significant invitation you could receive at that time. If you were at the king's table, you were either a mighty warrior or joining the family, a part of the family, but you were in. You were elite. You had every bit of food, clothing, opportunity, privilege you could ever dream of if you're at the king's table. At the king's table, that was the place. And David says, does anybody exist anymore related to my best friend? And we find out that there is this guy, Mephibosheth. Probably a name that you're going to copy. But there's this kid of Jonathan, Mephibosheth. And David says, I am so proud of my friendship with Jonathan. I want his last remaining relative at my table. Now, just so you know the full significance of this, Mephibosheth was not any ordinary person. I'll show you some past scripture on this. Saul's son Jonathan had a son named Mephibosheth, who was crippled as a child. He was 5 years old when the report came from Jezreel that Saul and Jonathan had been killed in battle. When the child's nurse heard the news, she picked him up and fled, but as she hurried away, she dropped him, and he became crippled. In this society, if you had become crippled like that, you would be ostracized. And he was so afraid of his life, so ostracized, he went into hiding. But King David, being an attentive friend, says, I want you at my table. I find that very powerful and significant for you and I. Because a king was willing to have someone at his table based on attentiveness. In fact, let's review all three, because I think it all plays out here. Be selfless, be faithful, be attentive. This is being a good friend, illustrated by the life of Jonathan and David. And yeah, we've talked about the friends that we need, and we are going to really get at the toxic friends. But before we go there next week, can we just stay here for a moment and make sure that it's not just a demand of others, but it is a lifestyle of our own? Be selfless. Refrigerator rights. What I've got is yours. Be faithful. A loyalty where your preferences take a back seat. Be attentive where you're aware of what's really going on in their lives. I hope you hear the heart of this message, and it's that we do not require of others what we're unwilling to apply ourselves. So I pray this for you, that you will be the best friend you could possibly ever be. Let me pray for you. God, we thank you for the privileges of getting to hear from you through a story that really happened. God, I pray for those who have not been good friends. For all of us, God, our blind spots, the places in our lives that we don't admit what we do. I pray that you'll reveal truth in our lives. That you'll reveal the truth, whether it's good or bad, that you'll reveal it. And God, please, with your Spirit, give us the power to make the changes that need to be made so that we can be the friends that we should be. God, I pray for everyone in our region who is desperate for belonging, who might even feel isolated. Lord, I ask for opportunities. Please give us opportunities to be a friend to people who need friends. We pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen.